London, 1817. Miss Eleanor Zephyr stood in the corner of Lady Ashbury's ballroom, observing the whirl of silk gowns and polished boots with the practiced detachment of a battlefield general, or rather, a veteran of 7 London seasons who had long ago accepted her place as a permanent fixture along the wallpaper. At 28, Eleanor had made peace with spinsterhood, finding a certain liberty in her position that married ladies could never enjoy. She adjusted her spectacles and smoothed the modest dove-grey gown that had seen no fewer than 3 seasons. "Eleanor, dearest, you might try to look a trifle more animated," her mother whispered, appearing at her side with the stealth of a woman who had spent decades navigating ballrooms. "Lord Winterley glanced this way just moments ago." "Mother, I assure you Lord Winterley was merely calculating the distance to the punch bowl, which happens to be directly behind me." Eleanor's tone was light but firm. "Besides, I have no intention of performing like a trained spaniel for the entertainment of aging bachelors who suddenly find their fortunes in need of replenishment." Mrs. Zephyr's sigh could have extinguished candles. "You were not always this cynical." Perhaps not, Eleanor thought, but experience had proven an effective teacher. At 21, she had believed in the possibility of a love match, had imagined herself swept away by a gentleman who valued her quick mind and warm heart above her modest dowry and unremarkable features. That dream had withered under the harsh light of 7 seasons, during which she had watched a parade of débutantes, each more beautiful and wealthy than the last, claim the eligible bachelors while she faded further into the background. "I am merely practical," Eleanor replied. "Marriage is a business arrangement, and I appear to be unsaleable goods. Fortunately, I find I prefer my independence to the dubious pleasure of becoming someone's property." The truth was more complex. Eleanor had constructed her fortress of independence stone by stone, each one laid with care after another society beauty had captured attention she once foolishly thought might be hers. Her modest inheritance from her grandmother provided just enough income to maintain a small cottage in the countryside once her parents were gone. It wasn't the future she had once dreamed of, but it was hers, and she had determined to find contentment in it. Her mother departed with another sigh, leaving Eleanor to her contemplation of the newest crop of débutantes. They fluttered about the room like exotic butterflies, their white gowns and flushed cheeks attracting swarms of eager gentlemen. The season's incomparable, Miss Diana Hartwell, stood at the center of the largest cluster, her golden curls bouncing as she laughed at something her admirers had said. "They resemble nothing so much as bees around a honey pot, do they not?" came a deep voice from beside her. Eleanor turned, startled to find herself addressed by a gentleman she did not recognize, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a mouth that suggested it smiled more often than it frowned, though it was not smiling now. "I beg your pardon," she said, discomfited by his unexpected appearance and direct gaze. "The gentleman," he clarified, nodding toward the cluster around Miss Hartwell. Buzzing and fussing, desperate for a taste of something sweet with little thought to whether the substance has any nutritional value. Eleanor could not help the small laugh that escaped her. "Sir, you speak of the season's most celebrated beauty and her admirers. I fear your metaphor borders on treason against the realm of polite society." "Ah, but you laughed, which suggests you might be guilty of similar seditious thoughts." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Percy Westmoreland, Earl of Thornfield, recently returned from abroad and apparently deficient in proper ballroom conversation." The Earl of Thornfield. Eleanor had heard the whispers. 34 years old, obscenely wealthy, and newly inherited the title after his cousin's unexpected death. Every matchmaking mamma in London had marked him as the season's greatest prize. "Miss Eleanor Zephyr," she replied with a small curtsy. "And I assure you, my lord, that I harbor no rebellious thoughts whatsoever. I am a model of propriety." "Your eyes betray you, Miss Zephyr. They sparkle with mischief even as you speak of propriety." He leaned slightly closer. "Tell me, How many seasons have you observed this particular ritual? Eleanor stiffened. I believe that is a rather impertinent question from a gentleman I have only just met. Forgive me. I did not ask to embarrass you, but rather because you watch the proceedings with the discerning eye of an experienced general. I find myself in need of a guide to this battlefield, having spent the past decade managing estates in the West Indies. 7, she answered, surprising herself with her candor. This is my 7th season, though I attend merely to accompany my younger cousin. She nodded toward pretty, 19-year-old Louisa, who was currently being led into a quadrille by a promising young viscount. Then you are perfectly positioned to explain the rules of engagement, Lord Thornfield said. For instance, why am I the object of such scrutiny from the cluster of ladies near the potted palms? Eleanor glanced toward the group of dowagers he indicated. Because, my lord, you are new blood in a rather anemic pool. An earl, presumably wealthy, and unmarried, you might as well have a target painted on your back. How terrifying. He did not look terrified in the slightest. And what of you, Miss Zephyr? Do you also have designs on my title and fortune? Certainly not, she replied crisply. I have no designs whatsoever, on you or any gentleman. How refreshing. His smile was slow and genuine. In that case, might I request the pleasure of this dance? As a gesture of gratitude for your honesty. Before Eleanor could formulate a response that balanced politeness with her desire to avoid becoming a curiosity, the faded spinster partnered with the season's most eligible bachelor. The orchestra struck up a waltz. She began, but found herself already being led toward the dance floor. My lord, I must warn you that this will cause talk. I detest gossip, Miss Zephyr, almost as much as I detest pretense. Shall we give them something substantial to discuss? And then his hand was at her waist, and they were moving among the swirling couples, and Eleanor was acutely aware that every eye in the ballroom had turned toward them. The pressure of his hand at her back was firm but not presumptuous, his lead confident without being overbearing. She had forgotten the pleasure of being guided by a skilled partner, of moving in harmony with another person. You dance well, he observed. You sound surprised. Not at all. I merely offer a compliment where one is deserved. Then I shall return it. You are a fine dancer yourself, my lord. Percy, he said. My friends call me Percy. We are hardly friends, Lord Thornfield. We've only just met. True, but I have a feeling we shall become friends, Miss Zephyr. You see, you are the first person in London who has spoken to me as a man rather than a title. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. I spoke impertinently. You spoke honestly, and honesty is a rare commodity in these gilded halls. His gaze was disconcertingly direct. Tell me something, Miss Zephyr. If you have no designs on marriage, what do you desire from life? The question was so unexpected, so unlike the usual ballroom conversation, that Eleanor answered truthfully before she could consider the wisdom of doing so. Freedom, she said. The liberty to read what I choose, to go where I wish without chaperones, to manage my own modest affairs without requiring a husband's permission for every trifling expenditure. Ah, he said softly. You desire independence? Yes. She felt suddenly vulnerable, having revealed so much to a virtual stranger. A shocking ambition for a woman, I'm sure. Not shocking at all. Rather admirable, in fact. The music drew to a close, and he stepped back, bowing. Thank you for the dance, Miss Zephyr. I hope you will not consider it an imposition on your independence if I call upon you tomorrow afternoon. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon. I should like to continue our conversation in a setting where we needn't shout over violins and gossip. May I call on you tomorrow? Aware of the many eyes upon them, Eleanor managed a composed nod. If you wish, my lord. As he escorted her back to her mother, Eleanor caught fragments of whispered conversations. The Zephyr girl, 7 seasons, what can he be thinking? Even her mother looked stunned as Lord Thornfield made his bow and retreated. Eleanor, Mrs. Zephyr hissed, what did you say to the Earl? Nothing of consequence, mother. We merely discussed beekeeping. Her mother looked faint. He is calling tomorrow. We must have cook prepare her best cakes, and your blue muslin must be pressed, and, mother, Eleanor interrupted gently. It is only a social call. Lord Thornfield is new to London and merely seeking acquaintances. Do not build castles from a foundation of sand. Yet as she spoke the words, Eleanor felt a treacherous flicker of something she had thought long extinguished. Hope. She ruthlessly suppressed it. The Earl was simply being kind, or perhaps he found her lack of matrimonial ambition novel enough to be temporarily entertaining. Either way, she would not make the mistake of reading more into his attention than was there. She was still repeating this sensible admonition to herself when Lord Thornfield arrived the following afternoon, immaculately dressed in a blue coat that emphasized his broad shoulders. He brought with him a book, not flowers, as a suitor might, but a leather-bound volume of poetry. I recalled you mentioned an interest in reading freely, he explained, presenting it to her. This is a rather unconventional collection by a new poet. I thought you might enjoy it. Eleanor examined the volume with genuine pleasure. Blake's songs of innocence and experience. How thoughtful, my lord. Percy, he corrected gently. The visit lasted well over an hour, during which they discussed everything from poetry to politics, the conversation flowing as easily as if they had known each other for years rather than a day. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months, drawn out of her carefully constructed shell by his genuine interest in her opinions. You are not what I expected, Miss Zephyr, he said as he prepared to take his leave. What did you expect? I'm not entirely sure, he admitted. But I find the reality far more intriguing than any expectation could have been. After he left, Eleanor firmly told herself not to anticipate seeing him again. Yet the following day brought another call, and the day after that an invitation to drive in the park. By the end of the week, all of London was buzzing with speculation about the Earl of Thornfield's inexplicable interest in Miss Eleanor Zephyr, 7-season veteran and confirmed spinster. It must be her family connections, Lady Jersey theorized at Almack's. The Zephyrs are distantly related to the Duke of Hartington, are they not? Perhaps it's a wager, suggested Sir William Blackwell. Some gentlemen find sport in the most peculiar challenges. Eleanor heard the whispers, saw the speculative glances, and built her walls higher. She would not allow herself to be hurt when Lord Thornfield's attention inevitably shifted to a more appropriate object. Yet with each meeting, each conversation that delved deeper into their mutual interests and beliefs, the foundation of those walls weakened. I have tickets for the exhibition at the Royal Academy, Percy announced during their drive in Hyde Park. Would you care to accompany me tomorrow? I'm told there's a particularly controversial Turner that's causing quite the stir. Eleanor hesitated. People are already talking, my lord. Percy, he corrected, as he always did. And people will always talk, Eleanor. The question is whether we grant them the power to determine our actions. Easy for you to say, she replied with unexpected heat. You are an earl. I am merely a spinster of modest means. Society's judgment affects us differently. True, he acknowledged after a moment. Forgive me. I spoke thoughtlessly. There is nothing to forgive. Eleanor softened. But I must be practical. Whatever your intentions, and I make no presumptions about them, this attention you're showing me will eventually become tedious. You'll attend a ball, or a dinner, and meet someone more suitable. Someone younger, prettier, with a substantial dowry and the bloom of youth still upon her. That is the natural order of things. Percy pulled the carriage to a halt in a secluded corner of the park. Is that what you truly believe? That my interest in you is a passing fancy? It must be, Eleanor said simply. I am 28, near-sighted, of average appearance and modest fortune. You are one of the most eligible gentlemen in England. Mathematics alone suggests the improbability of any serious attachment. Mathematics, he repeated, looking amused despite the seriousness of his expression. Eleanor, may I speak plainly? I wish you would. I have spent 10 years managing sugar plantations in Jamaica, surrounded by people who viewed me only as a source of wealth and position. Upon inheriting the earldom, I returned to England to find the situation remarkably unchanged. His gaze held hers steadily. And then I met you, who looked at me as though I were simply a man who had said something mildly interesting. Do you have any idea how refreshing that was? Eleanor swallowed hard. I'm sure novelty has its charm, but this is not about novelty, he interrupted, his voice low and intense. This is about finding someone who values substance over appearance, character over status, genuine connection over social advantage. I watched you for half an hour before I approached you at that ball, Eleanor. I saw how you observed everything, how your eyes reflected intelligence and humor even as you stood apart. I recognized a kindred spirit. Percy, she whispered, the name feeling both foreign and familiar on her lips. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to the exhibition with me tomorrow. Say you'll allow me the privilege of continuing to know you better. He took her gloved hand in his. Say you'll consider the possibility that perhaps I see you more clearly than you see yourself. How could she refuse such a request? And so began a courtship that set all of London gossiping. The Earl of Thornfield squired Miss Eleanor Zephyr to exhibitions, to the theatre, to musical evenings and literary salons. He sent books instead of flowers, engaged her in debate rather than flattery, and looked at her in a way that made her forget her spectacles and faded gowns. Yet the voice of doubt whispered constantly in Eleanor's ear. Each time they attended a social function, she watched his interactions with the season's beauties with a knot of dread in her stomach. Particularly Miss Diana Hartwell, whose golden loveliness and substantial dowry made her the perfect countess material. The inevitable moment came at Lady Wentworth's midsummer ball. Eleanor arrived to find Percy surrounded by a group that included the radiant Miss Hartwell, who was gazing up at him with undisguised admiration. As Eleanor watched, Diana laughed musically at something Percy said, placing her hand briefly on his arm in a gesture that, while within the bounds of propriety, suggested intimacy. They make a handsome couple, do they not? Lady Wentworth's voice came from just behind Eleanor. Indeed, Eleanor managed to reply. I've heard from a most reliable source that he's considering making an offer, Lady Wentworth continued. Her dowry is substantial, and the family connections are impeccable. A most suitable match for the new Earl. Eleanor felt the careful edifice of hope she had been building crumble to dust. Of course. This was always how it would end. Percy had enjoyed her companionship, had perhaps even valued their connection, but when faced with the prospect of choosing a countess, how could he possibly select a faded spinster over the season's incomparable? She slipped away before Percy could spot her, sending word through a footman that she had developed a headache and returned home. It was not entirely a falsehood, her temples pounded with the effort of holding back tears. The following morning brought a note from Percy, expressing concern for her health and asking permission to call. Eleanor sent a brief reply indicating she was much improved but unfortunately had prior engagements for the day. She spent the hours instead reorganizing her bookshelves and telling herself that this clean break was for the best. 2 more days passed in similar fashion, with notes from Percy met with polite but distant replies from Eleanor. On the 3rd day, he arrived unannounced, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You're avoiding me," he said without preamble when the maid showed him into the drawing room. Eleanor, caught unprepared, was wearing a simple morning dress, her hair in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. She felt at a disadvantage but lifted her chin. "I've been occupied with family matters." Eleanor. Just her name, spoken in that voice that seemed to see through all her carefully constructed defenses. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. I simply realized that our friendship, while pleasant, has perhaps become the subject of more speculation than is comfortable for both of us." Percy studied her face. "This isn't about speculation. Something changed at Lady Wentworth's ball." "Tell me what it was." "I saw you with Miss Hartwell," Eleanor admitted after a long pause. "You seemed compatible." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And you believed the worst." "I believed what was reasonable to believe," she corrected. "You are an earl in need of a countess. She is young, beautiful, wealthy, and accomplished. The mathematics, as I once said, is rather straightforward." "Damn the mathematics," Percy said with unexpected vehemence. "And damn these social calculations that have convinced you of your own unworthiness. Do you truly think me so shallow as to be swayed by a pretty face and a hefty dowry?" "It isn't shallow to make a suitable match," Eleanor argued. "It's practical, sensible, expected. I have spent my entire life meeting expectations, Eleanor. Managing estates I didn't want because family duty demanded it. Returning to claim a title I never sought because tradition required it." He stepped closer. "The one freedom I insist upon is the right to choose my own wife based on my own criteria. And my criterion is simple: I wish to marry the woman I love." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop. "Percy, I love you, Eleanor Zephyr." He took her hands in his. "I love your mind, your wit, your integrity. I love how you see the world clearly yet maintain your kindness. I love that you value independence and still have room in your heart for connection." Tears pricked at the corners of Eleanor's eyes. "But I'm not. If you're about to say you're not young enough, or pretty enough, or wealthy enough, I shall be most seriously displeased," he interrupted with gentle firmness. "You are exactly enough. You are everything I want and everything I need." "Society will be scandalized," she whispered. "Society can go hang," he replied promptly. "I didn't return to England to please the ton. I returned to take up my responsibilities and, if I was fortunate, to find happiness. I found both in you." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity, nothing but love. The wall she had built so carefully around her heart collapsed completely. "I love you too," she said simply. "I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish, that you would eventually come to your senses and choose someone more appropriate. But I couldn't stop my heart from wanting what it wants. And what it wants, quite desperately, is you." Percy's smile was radiant. "Then you'll marry me?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the ease of her answer. "Though I warn you, there will be talk." "Let them talk," Percy said, drawing her into his arms. "I've made my choice, and I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The announcement of their engagement the following day caused precisely the scandal Eleanor had predicted. Drawing rooms across London buzzed with incredulity and speculation. Lady Jersey declared it the most bewildering match of the decade. Sir William suggested the Earl must have suffered a head injury abroad. Miss Diana Hartwell wore a brave smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But as the weeks passed and the couple appeared at social functions, radiating contentment and obvious affection, the tone of the gossip gradually shifted. There were still those who clucked their tongues at the Earl's inexplicable choice, but others began to observe the way he looked at his betrothed, as though she were the only woman in the room, and the way she blossomed under his regard, her quiet confidence and quick wit becoming more apparent. "Perhaps it's not so mysterious after all," Lady Wentworth remarked to her circle. "They appear to genuinely enjoy each other's company. How novel." Their wedding at St. George's was elegant but not ostentatious. Eleanor wore a gown of deep blue silk that brought out the warmth in her eyes, and Percy couldn't take his gaze from her as she walked down the aisle. Afterward, as they rode in the carriage toward Thornfield House for their wedding breakfast, he brought her hand to his lips. "Are you happy, my Countess?" he asked. Eleanor looked at him, this man who had seen past her faded gowns and spectacles to the woman beneath, who valued her mind and her heart above all else, and felt a joy so complete it seemed to illuminate her from within. "Extraordinarily so, my lord," she replied, and then with a smile that held all the confidence of a woman who knew herself truly loved, she corrected herself. "Percy." As the carriage rolled on toward their future, Eleanor reflected that perhaps the mathematical calculations of society's expectations weren't as straightforward as she had once believed. Perhaps the true equation for happiness involved variables that couldn't be measured by youth or beauty or fortune, but rather by the perfect alchemy that occurred when two hearts recognized each other across a crowded ballroom and refused to be governed by anything but love.